CBS presents this program in color.
The case against O.J. Simpson may well hang or fall on DNA evidence.
If the defense can show that the DNA evidence from a blood stain or a hair did not come from O.J. Simpson, then the defense has an answer to the question, if not O.J., who?
Tonight we'll be talking exclusively with the team of lawyers O.J. Simpson has hired to help him prove or disprove any DNA evidence in this case.
By the year 2000, there will be 3 security guards for every 1 police officer in an unregulated, uncontrolled environment.
How we doing tonight?
These guys can come out of prison one day, be a security guard the next day with a gun, and there's nobody out there to watch them.
It is impossible to meet Mimi without being captivated.
Right here.
Essentially, her story is this. Small-town kid from Iowa goes to Chicago, becomes a nightclub star, and is discovered by a big modeling agency. It's a dream come true. But there is one twist to this plot that I didn't believe, and I don't think you will either.
From CBS News, America Tonight, with Deborah Norville and Dana King, and correspondents Bob McEwen, Peter Van Sant, and Bill Geis. And now, from the CBS Broadcast Center in New York City, Dana King.
Good evening, and welcome to this live edition of America Tonight. Ahead, we have some new angles on the O.J. Simpson case, from the evidence to the media coverage to the views of the American public on this story that has seized the attention of the world. But the top story in America Tonight is what will happen tomorrow when O.J. Simpson, just hours from now, steps into a Los Angeles courtroom. Joining us with more from Los Angeles is Deborah Norville. Good evening, Deborah.
Hi, Dana. You know, up to this point, this case has been fought in another court, the court of public opinion, as each side in this matter has been vying for America's sympathies. But tomorrow the case moves to Los Angeles Municipal Court for an extraordinary preliminary hearing into the murder case against O.J. Simpson. There, while the world is watching, while the cameras in the courtroom are rolling, O.J. Simpson and the rest of us will hear for the first time the real evidence, the evidence that the state hopes will prove he is not an innocent man, but a cold-blooded killer.
Yes, Your Honor. To the extent that
Trying to make that case will be prosecutors Marcia Clark and William Hodgman.
It is always difficult, incredibly difficult, to prosecute a celebrity, a popular celebrity.
So far, former District Attorney Ira Reiner believes overzealous publicity has hurt the state's case.
They were trying to focus the public's attention on the victims and the nature of the crime so as to take some of the horror away from O.J. Simpson.
What did they do wrong? What did the prosecution do wrong, in your opinion?
They went a little too far, a little too fast, and then it snapped back in their face.
I would indicate to counsel that
It will be Clark's job to get the case back on track. She's best known for convicting a deranged fan in the 1989 murder of actress Rebecca Schaefer.
I want no one to forget the fact that Robert Bardo wakes up every morning and Rebecca Schaefer lies buried in a grave in Oregon.
Her strength is that she is a killer cross-examiner. I mean, she'll bore her in like hard steel.
Mr. Shapiro has...
At her side is Hodgman, lead prosecutor in the Charles Keating savings and loan scandal.
Bill's great strength is that he can work with a circumstantial evidence case very effectively, and the two of them are going to work together very well.
And many think Robert Shapiro is also the right match for Simpson. Alvin Michelson is one of LA's top defense attorneys. What's Bob Shapiro's trademark?
Well, if I had to say, I think he's a very well-liked man. I mean, he's the kind of guy who's cultivated judges and prosecutors all his legal life. That's what he's done. He's shown them that he can be trusted. And, you know, they see him as, in some sense, as one of theirs.
Shapiro has represented a number of high-profile clients over the years, including Marlon Brando's son, Christian, charged in the shooting death of his sister's lover.
Your Honor, in addition,
Shapiro's smooth courtroom style may be one of his greatest assets.
He's not going to look like some sort of badass guy trying to take a guilty man and get him off. He's going to look like he would only represent this man if he thought he was innocent.
Prosecutors have estimated that the preliminary hearing will last about a week. But if the defense mounts an affirmative defense, presents its own witnesses, it could last a lot longer. Dana?
We'll be watching. All right, Deborah, thank you. For his high-profile case, O.J. Simpson has put together a high-profile defense team. A key member of that team, F. Lee Bailey, talked to us about the Simpson case and what's at stake, and he didn't mince words.
Simpson is the worst case of pretrial prejudicial publicity where inadmissible information or non-existent information was foisted off on the public before the trial, and you got to the point it's impossible to sort out what the jury heard here and what they already heard before they came into the courtroom.
Shouldn't the judge in this case close the process?
The only thing a judge can do right now, aside from admonishing the lawyers not to talk about the evidence in the case outside the courtroom, is to hold a hearing and see what admissible evidence will be permitted.
And O.J.'s defense team has carefully guided the case to what many believe is an advantageous position. Because at tomorrow's hearing, the defense gets to see the prosecution reveal its strategy for winning a conviction.
The whole business about getting a look at the prosecution's evidence is overblown because in California you get to see everything, virtually everything, before you get to trial.
Do you think he could walk away from the hearing?
Sure, absolutely.
No bail necessary, nothing?
You don't need bail if no probable cause is found. That's not to say they can't come back a week later with more evidence that they've discovered in the interim, but there is no question of bail. You are released for failure of the charge.
And if that happens?
3 bites at the apple and he is forever free.
Those 3 bites are the number of preliminary hearings or grand juries that can be called.
Well, if they go to a preliminary hearing and there's no probable cause shown and they do it 2 more times, the case is over.
Bailey says he joined the case at the request of longtime friend Robert Shapiro, who, by the way, defended Bailey back in 1982 when Bailey was charged with drunk driving. Over the past week, he's been making news, blasting the prosecution as well as the press.
I just don't comprehend that kind of conduct, and I can't understand why the LA bar would tolerate it.
So, Mr. Bailey, what's your job in this case?
Well, first of all, hopefully to rein in all these prosecutors that haven't grown up yet and all these media people that got running so fast they stopped checking their sources and put a lot of garbage on the street, and just slow everybody down and see if we can guide this case back into the courtroom and then have a go.
Do you think O.J. can get a fair trial?
I think if he went to trial today, based on the polls I'm seeing, there are too many people out there that are not yet aware that this evidence was phony, and he could not get a fair trial. There would be a tremendous amount of prejudice in the jury box.
While F. Lee Bailey thinks Simpson right now could not get a fair trial, Americans we talked to are evenly divided. Throughout tonight's broadcast, we'll be bringing you the results of an exclusive CBS News America Tonight poll on the Simpson case conducted just last night. Of those who had an opinion, 45% said they believe O.J. Simpson can get a fair trial. 43% believe he can't. The poll has a sampling error plus or minus 4 percentage points. Deborah?
Dana, now a look from the other side. With us live is Vincent Bugliosi, a former Los Angeles district attorney who himself prosecuted one of the country's highest profile murder cases, the case against Charles Manson. Welcome. There's obviously the prosecution would have liked to have gotten a grand jury indictment. This is not their preference that the preliminary hearing go on. How much of a disadvantage are they at?
Well, I don't know if it's a disadvantage, but the main reason that they prefer the grand jury, obviously, is that the defense is not present, can't cross-examine the witnesses. Here, the defense can cross-examine the prosecution witnesses. If that happens, of course, the defense attorney will try to lock the prosecution witnesses into their testimony. And it's difficult, even if you're telling the truth, to tell the same story the same way twice, in the same identical way. Therefore, if they lock the prosecution witnesses into their testimony, if their testimony differs at the trial from their prelim testimony, they can use that to attack the credibility of the witnesses. That's the main disadvantage of this case going to the prelim.
The public scrutiny on this case is enormous. How does it change the preliminary hearing than if it were not so highly visible?
Well, from the standpoint of the prosecutor, obviously, he's got to be prepared no matter if one person is watching or a million people are watching. He has that obligation to the people, the state, whom he is representing. But in a case of this magnitude, he has an additional reason. If he makes a mistake in a routine case, only the courthouse mice know about it. Here, the whole world knows about it, so he's under a high-powered microscope. Other than that, the DA is going to present their case in a very routine way, and they obviously think they have enough evidence. There's an unwritten rule among prosecutors that you don't bring a case unless you're convinced you can get a conviction at the trial. Garcetti and his people, I think, are ethical. And if they thought they had enough evidence to get a conviction at the trial, surely they must feel they have enough evidence at the preliminary examination.
But is it likely we'll see all that evidence at the preliminary hearing?
No, they're going to put on the bare bones. They don't have to because the burden of proof is very low. So they're only going to put on a skeleton of their case.
Real quick, F. Lee Bailey said it looked like O.J. Simpson could possibly walk. Do you think that could happen?
Lee's a friend of mine. I like him, but I think Lee is dreaming. The burden of proof is very, very low. I find it highly unrealistic that the judge will kick it off. If he did, by the way, under the law, the DA could merely refile the charges. The Fifth Amendment prohibition against double jeopardy only applies to trials, not to preliminary hearings.
Good point. Vincent Bugliosi, thanks for being with us. Dana, back to you.
All right, Deborah, thank you. Now stay with us. We have much more in the Simpson case, including a look ahead to what may be the most critical piece of evidence, and a look back at another sensational case with a direct link to this one.
The standard, set by the federal government, requires that a car with 2 airbags must help protect 2 passengers, ignoring the center seat passenger. The higher standard in the all-new DeVille by Cadillac, an air bank system which provides supplemental protection for not 1, not 2, but all 3 front seat passengers. The air bank system in the new V8-powered DeVille by Cadillac, creating a higher standard.
Now Glade Carpet Potpourri is 5 times better than baking soda.
It's 5 times tougher.
Improved Glade Carpet Potpourri absorbs tough carpet odors 5 times better than baking soda.
It's 5 times fresher.
New Glade Carpet Potpourri in a new pet formula, too, for wet pet accidents.
It's 5 times better than baking soda.
Fresh from Glade. SC Johnson Wax.
Would you spend 30 cents to have breakfast with Tony?
Is this a trick question? Tony the Tiger, I know him. Nothing costs 30 cents nowadays.
Yeah, well, here's one. A serving of Kellogg's Frosted Flake cereal in milk costs 30 cents. So, breakfast with Tony.
Oh, yeah, Tony the Tiger.
He's a striped tiger with a long tail and a big smile on his face.
30 cents, big guy. Just part of the value in having breakfast with Kellogg's. Okay, let's hear it.
Great.
They're great.
Well, he's right.
Go ahead, ask her age.
I'm 34.
42. Who do they think they're fooling? Everyone. Maybelline Revitalizing Makeup. Age-denying coverage. Outwits fine lines. Revitalizing Makeup.
And now new Revitalizing Mascara.
Revitalizing.
Finds lashes you didn't think you had. Fills them out, makes them count. Maybe she's born with it.
Maybe it's Maybelline.
This submarine has a crew of 70. Could you perform all 70 jobs on board? Each one of these men can. How'd they do that? Thursday. Diagnosis Murder, Fridays on CBS.
Before the Simpson case takes center stage tomorrow, it's likely that any judge connected with it will be studying another murder that made headlines. Those headlines changed the course of the trial and changed the life of the man accused. It began, ironically, 40 years ago this weekend, and it's a case that F. Lee Bailey knows very well.
Dr. Sam Shepard was an osteopathic surgeon, a young one in Cleveland, Ohio, 1954. On the night of the 4th of July, after a little dinner party, somebody bludgeoned his wife to death.
At the time, it was called the crime of the century. A handsome 30-year-old doctor accused of murdering his pregnant wife. The doctor said he didn't do it.
We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled and sworn, do find the defendant, Sam H. Shepard, not guilty of murder in the first degree, but guilty of murder in the second degree.
Dr. Shepard spent 10 years in jail until a little-known defense attorney named F. Lee Bailey took on the case. After Shepard had failed 11 times to get a new trial, Bailey took the case all the way to the Supreme Court. It ruled Shepard had been denied a fair trial because of the way the judge had handled the media. The problem was the publicity. That's what the Supreme Court ruled.
In Shepard's case, the editor of the Cleveland Press wrote front-page editorials telling the police what they should do, telling the judges what they should do, telling the prosecutors what to do, and ultimately telling the jurors what to do.
And when the jurors convicted Sam Shepard, his brother Richard spoke out on the lack of evidence.
I have seen absolutely nothing that would make me think in any way that Dr. Sam was guilty of the death of Marilyn Shepard.
What were the keys that unlocked the gate for Sam Shepard?
The way that the jury was allowed to read the newspapers, the way the judge refused to even instruct them not to consider what the papers said, particularly the editorials, the fact that the news cameramen were all over the jury box, crawling around the jurors and up on the judge's bench. As the Supreme Court of Ohio described it, it was a circus for the news media.
This was a first-class jury and did a conscientious job. Going home, gentlemen.
Bailey successfully argued that prejudicial publicity ruined Shepard's chances of a fair trial.
Oh, I think somebody owes Sam Shepard something.
In much the same way O.J. Simpson's defense is arguing now. You think pretrial publicity is more damaging nowadays than it was 40 years ago? Is the perception different?
No, I think the population of Cleveland in 1954 was much more rural, not as well educated, much more dominated by the newspaper, which did the real damage there. It wasn't so much the television.
So the town rallied against him, the city, everyone, basically.
As I described it in the Supreme Court, in a town loaded with wolves, he was the only rabbit.
Shepard won the right to have a new trial, and with F. Lee Bailey as his defense attorney, in 1966, a jury acquitted him.
About time. After 10 years in prison for something I didn't do, it was about time.
And when it comes to the issue of pretrial publicity, many people have been pointing the finger at the media, saying the press is to blame. Well, is it? Tonight, a member of the media points the finger right back. Here's Jerry Nachman, former editor-in-chief of the grandfather of American tabloids, the New York Post.
Let me say what everybody in the news business has been too careful not to say on television, and that is the press is not part of the criminal justice system. The press technically has no responsibility to guarantee O.J. Simpson a fair trial. It sounds awful, it sounds vain, but it happens to be a fact. We're not lawyers, we're not jurors, we're not judges, we're journalists. Lots of what goes on in journalism, whether you like it or not, is perfectly acceptable journalism and totally unacceptable justice procedure. For example, you watch a trial and you hear a lot about hearsay. Not admissible, it's hearsay. Well, hearsay is totally admissible journalism. Every time you hear a story that says, White House sources say, or CBS News has learned, that's hearsay. It's not allowed in a courtroom, it's perfectly acceptable and often very ethical journalism. If there were a correlation between hugely sensational and sensationalistic coverage of major crimes and the defendant's inability to get a fair trial, how did the cops get off in the Rodney King beating the first time? How did the people who nearly pummeled Reginald Denny to death get away with the major counts in their trial? How did Marion Barry get convicted of only the lowest count when he was seen by millions of people thousands of times sucking on a crack pipe? Juries in this country have tried cases for 200 years in which the community knows all the details. And yet the requirement then, as now, has always been, forget what you heard out of here. Can you render a verdict based on what you heard in here? And juries for 200 years in this country have been saying yes.
And a footnote, according to our poll, most of those who have an opinion on the subject feel the media have treated O.J. Simpson fairly. In our CBS News America Tonight survey, 47% of those polled say they believe the media have been fair to Simpson. 33% say the media have been too harsh. 10% say too easy. Deborah?
Dana, just as this case has generated so much public attention, a lot of the attention now turns to the evidence. Prosecutors say as many as 60 pieces of evidence could be presented at the preliminary hearing or later on. It all begins tomorrow. And in the weeks to come, one tool may loom even larger. In fact, some folks have speculated that the murder case, and indeed O.J. Simpson's fate, could hang on it. That tool is DNA testing.
Remember, a DNA test is not a fingerprint. That DNA profile is not unique to just one person in this world.
The DNA testing can be as accurate as a regular fingerprint. We can prove that the genetic material that was left at the scene of the crime belongs to that particular person.
Have you double-sized it?
Science and the law at odds about what DNA testing can and cannot prove. Everyone has a unique set of genes made of a chemical known as DNA.
The crime laboratories that do DNA testing would like the public to think that DNA is infallible.
There's going to be a lot of controversy about the statistics offered.
Attorneys Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, just hired by the Simpson defense team, have litigated cases both challenging and defending DNA.
The theory may very well be infallible, but the testing isn't a theory, it's done by people. And we have found since the beginning of time is that once people get involved in complicated scientific testing, they make mistakes. And the more complicated the test, the greater frequency they make mistakes.
Dr. Michael Baird is a DNA expert from Life Codes Laboratory in Connecticut. You would want your life hanging on this kind of testing? You're that sure about DNA?
I am. I mean, if I was involved in a crime that I did not commit, I rely on the DNA evidence to exonerate me.
You would have no hesitation about it keeping you out of the gas chamber?
Nope. I mean, it is that accurate.
DNA testing of genetic material at the crime scene could prove O.J. Simpson innocent of the murders of his wife Nicole and her friend Ronald Goldman. It could also convince a jury that Simpson is guilty.
Police say bloodstains indicate the body was first here and then
DNA from Ken Register's blood put him in jail for life because tests revealed it was similar to the DNA found at the crime scene where a young girl was murdered. A DNA match, the experts call it. Kirk Bloodsworth was in jail for 9 years for rape and murder.
Kurt, how you feel? Fantastic. Free at last.
He was freed last June after DNA tests proved his DNA was not the killer's. Scientists call this exclusion, and it's the easiest thing to prove in court.
An exclusion is absolute. It's 100%.
If the defense can show that the DNA evidence from a blood stain or a hair did not come from O.J. Simpson, then the defense has an answer to the question, if not O.J., who? The answer is whoever left that DNA evidence at the crime scene. That they can argue, that person they can argue is the murderer.
Preliminary blood analysis indicates Simpson has the same blood type as the killers. O.J. Simpson's attorney, Robert Shapiro.
There is 1 chance in 15 on some of the evidence that the blood type matches Mr. Simpson.
That's not very probative evidence. If you just move up the road from the Los Angeles courthouse to the Rose Bowl, where they're playing the World Cup soccer matches right now, it would mean that at an average match, there are going to be 7,000 or 8,000 people in that crowd who have the same type.
So if DNA testing does not exclude O.J. Simpson outright, then the prosecution can only convince the jury by statistics that he probably did it. 1 in a million still isn't absolute. How do you get a jury to convict when there's an outside possibility you didn't make a match?
DNA testing is expressed as a frequency that pattern occurs.
The more times you get a match, the less likely it's just a fluke.
That's true.
Already, the defense is laying groundwork that could challenge the lab, which is conducting DNA tests.
We'd like the lab notes. We'd like the laboratory protocol. We'd like to know the laboratory error rate.
One of the grounds will be, for instance, that these laboratories do not have any meaningful error rates, so you don't know how frequently they screw up. A second problem is going to be the statistical one. Right now, those statistics are not admissible in California courts.
The prosecution would be well advised not to reach for some astronomical statistical estimate and to be very cautious in its presentation. And if the conservative DNA estimates are consistent with the prosecution's case, it plainly helps them because this is, after all, a circumstantial evidence case.
I think you need to take DNA testing as just a piece of the puzzle. I mean, it's not the whole thing, it's just a piece. It can be very powerful, but it needs to fit into the rest of the information that's available in the case.
Incidentally, America Tonight's interview with Scheck and Neufeld will be their last interview for quite some time. Shortly after we spoke with them, they were named to join the defense team for O.J. Simpson. Dana?
All right, Deborah, thank you. Now, when America Tonight continues, hired guns policing our streets. Are they the solution to crime or a part of the problem?
Ocean Lincoln 5.